The key here is just not giving up and getting discouraged then, because the energy it takes to do change management. Changing your career requires changing someone's perception on what they need in that job. It's going to take energy, it's going to take storytelling, it's going to take persistence, but it's possible.
Welcome to Real Creative Leadership, a place where creative leaders can find insights and practical guidance on the day-to-day job of being a creative leader. We focus on real issues, topics, and insights of creativity in the business world. Join me as we explore the best strategies for developing your team, getting others to embrace your vision, and generating amazing experiences. This webinar series is produced by the Stoke Group, and I'm your host, Adam Morgan, Adobe Executive Creative Director and author of Sorry Spock, Emotions Drive Business. And this is Real Creative Leadership. Hello and welcome to Real Creative Leadership, Season 3. We are so excited to have a new guest here today because there is a big question that a lot of people have been asking. You know, we talked about mentors and now people have asked, well, how do I change careers or pivot my career or do something different? And there are a lot of questions people have around career growth. So I'm excited today. We are going to talk about how do you change your career without starting over? And our guest today is George Hammer. He is the global head of marketing at TripAdvisor, and he has also a sordid past of many other great positions. And I'm not going to reveal them right now because that's part of today's show, of him talking through his experience and where he's been and how it's helped him grow and change as he's moved on from one role to the next. So welcome, George, to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adam, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get started and get some good perspective here. So we're going to dig deep into George's life. So to start out, why don't you give us a brief introduction about your career, maybe some background on your relationship with creativity and marketing, but it doesn't have to be all the details, but at least some good broad strokes of different paths and things that you've taken on your career path.
Yeah. Well, I think like most people, our discovery starts as kids. And my creative journey started with Legos and turkey. Legos were given to me at a young age as a mechanism to build things. And my last name is Hammer, so I kind of had to build things. And I found like my older brother was really good at getting the thing built faster because he was great at following the instructions. And I did not like the instructions. And so I always built something a little different than what was on the box. But that's kind of like how I led to, I love to play, but to also do something different. And I also remember when I was, I think in second or third grade, I participated and won an art contest. It was drawing a turkey out of your hand, but it was better. I spiced it up. And these are things I didn't remember until I went home and my parents made me clean out my closet and as they try to turn my bedroom into a gym. So
as you do.
Yeah, right. Those are, that's how I kind of, it's been in my DNA, and that's kind of like, as you look back, that's the type of person I am. I'm also a middle child, so I always strive to constantly be better. But I learned my creative craft on the job at a startup. I launched a startup, which was it was called Apple Batch. It was a LinkedIn for K through 12 teachers. And I was passionate and interested in marketing, human psychology, trying to figure out how to use creative and digital to drive more performance or to get people to fall in love with a brand. And so I signed up to be the CMO and lead the marketing team. And I never led marketing nor creative, never hired a designer or writer. And here I am building and hiring a team. And through late nights and working with my engineering team in India to kind of tweak and build things, to working with the first designer I hired because I didn't know how to screen designers. I actually was a colorblind designer. And I remember one night sitting next to him and trying to say, let's turn the button green and see what happens overnight. And that's when I realized that he couldn't tell. But he was brilliant. He learned all of design by memorizing the codes that were corresponded to colors.
Wow.
And so because that, I spent a lot of time sitting next to him on building design. And so that's how I got like started reading up and studying it and kind of figuring out what makes great design and great creative. And he was still to this day one of the best designers I ever worked with. And then I learned off the job creative through stumbling into Second City in Chicago, auditioning and making it into the improv conservatory program, where creative there is an exercise of failing fast, finding what works, and then codifying it and going. And that kind of the DNA of who I am, the learning on the job on business and learning off the job through improv was my creative awakening. And that took me through all sorts of industries and businesses to the place where I'm at today, which is TripAdvisor. And I think it's that's been a foundation for my career.
And I mean, this is interesting because normally this is what I'm hearing from someone who's like an executive creative director or something of their early beginnings of creativity. But you're obviously your end goal is, head of marketing, which is a totally different role. So that's very fascinating to see. There is good crossover of learning those same skills, regardless of wherever you end up.
No, marketing is getting really good at using AI, machine learning, data to help inform decisions. And marketers need to become great creative problem solvers to use that data to look at it in different ways. Otherwise, every marketer in the similar industry looks at the data and comes up with the blue logo. Every marketer ends up in the same events looking at each other and having similar outcomes, right? So I think the key to great marketers is the ability to kind of creatively interpret the data. And in that sense, creatives are the future of marketing. But I started my career in business consulting, so it's an interesting journey to have those I think rounding out the skills is critical to success.
Tell us some more about it. So you did consulting, and I know IBM or some other places. Maybe just hit just a few highlights of how your career has just taken some different turns as far as the company.
I was really fortunate when I came out of school. It was the dot-com bubble. And I was fortunate to get hired by Deloitte, a consulting company. It was a 2-year rotation program, 30 people around the country. And not only did I have like 8 different managers and bosses in each rotation, but then I had to go do totally different things, to the point when the recession got so bad, for 3 months, they rotated me in to do tax returns for high net worth wealth individuals. And so I was terrible at it, but I had to learn how to do tax returns. It was just crazy. But what was good about consulting, what you learn is how to be adaptive to the manager, how to understand client needs and wants, and then how to take structures and apply them to make creativity faster. Now, what I learned in consulting I didn't want to do, one of my last projects was working for Mayor Bloomberg at New York City Public Schools. And I remember spending months on coming up with a solution. And we were kind of digitizing and turning around and reinventing the school system. And after months of work, later the client brought in a deck from BCG and McKinsey, and they were all hired to do the same problem. And we all had the same deck, the same solution. And that was eye-awakening to me, which was, wow, if we're business consultants, the best, if we're all kind of looking at problems, coming up with the same solutions, business schools training people maybe not to think creatively enough. And then there's a big gap in the market for winning to actually think about how to be different. And so that was a huge learning for me. After consulting, I did the startup, the credit crisis hit, and had to sell off the business and worked my way into a media agency, Mindshare. And that was somehow I think by doing the startup and coming up with a test and learning approach to building a business and being having that learnings on digital, I was able to figure out how to integrate and help clients at a media agency transform from traditional to digital. And a large portion of that was integrated marketing communications. So I helped lead that practice. But I was real passionate about not just reach and frequency, but what was in the impression, like the content, the story, the creative. And so I wasn't fulfilled just in the media agency. And fortunately, I met with someone who was working at Discovery Communications, Discovery Channel, and they were looking to build out their digital practice, their digital arm to market shows, to build creative solutions, to sell to advertisers, and everything digital. I positioned myself well for that role and got into something that I thought was my dream job at the time in an industry that was really hard to get into, TV, right? And and I kind of just was in shock that I was there, just working in this company, doing this great job. And I was in a satellite office in Chicago because the whole digital team was acquired through acquisition. When they closed our office, I had to make the decision what to do, and I really wanted to lean into um, uh, creative storytelling. And I felt like there was something I didn't know because I never really worked in a an agency, a creative digital agency. Um, and I ended up interviewing and connected with a guy who was the CEO at the time. He went to University of Chicago for his MBA like I did. And we just connected. And 2 weeks later, I'm working at Digitas, working on Small Business Saturday, working on Taco Bell, working on all these great campaigns that were just super fun. And that's where I learned the importance of bringing fun into work. Um, and that there was a lot of really creative, smart people working for not a lot of money, working really hard hours, and the main drivers were a purpose and fun. That was like those are key parts of the creative world. And I started to see the writing on the wall for agencies, and that we were started competing with media companies like T Brand Studios, and those companies started competing with other agencies. We started competing with brands building their own studios. And I wanted to spend less time on thinking about how to beat each other. And I wanted to spend more time about building a brand. And that's why I decided that the brand was the right place for me. And I was fortunate that IBM reached out, and I started interviewing for this VP of marketing role during the interview process, and there was a need to help build storytelling and content marketing and the content arm of this brand, and I leaned in there because I was passionate about brand storytelling. And I kind of created the title that didn't exist then, Chief Content Officer. Wasn't at the company. I kind of helped build a function, a discipline, and a title that wasn't really there. And so that took me to Brand World. And my journey takes me to TripAdvisor because after 5 years at IBM, I built such a strong team that they were able to really do amazing stuff, and it wasn't pushing me as much as a leader anymore. And I wanted to go do something that I could continue my own personal learning journey. And here I am today.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a pretty windy journey, but you can see some of the threads of growth and looking at things in new ways. And I know when we spoke before, you have this, what do I say? It's like almost like this major driver in your life of what you've optimized towards. And I'd love you to talk to us about that, of like what, and I loved how you mentioned the fun aspect, but this kind of relates to that. But what is the thing the glue that's kept you going throughout your career?
Yeah, I've always been wrong about what I thought I wanted to do. And and that's why I hate the question of what do you want to do for 10 years from now? I thought I wanted to be a heart surgeon, own a Jimmy John subs shop, be a showrunner, everything. And what I learned is stop trying to pick a job and optimize for happiness instead. And for me, that means a lot of things. It means changing how I hire and surround myself by more diverse people that lead to more interesting and unique cultures. Helping going from a manager to a coach and helping people find their own thing they love and happiness. Changing my mindset. At agencies, it was all about retaining your people. When someone left, you said, "Oh, we hate you for leaving," and like someone's like they were leaving you. No, but now I look at the world as creating alumni networks, and that we embrace and support people wherever they go. Focusing on learning more and focusing on creating a mechanism to innovate so we can spend more time on the ideas and testing people's questions and hypotheses versus fighting about them. And all of those things I try to do hopefully leads to focusing more time on the work, more things that matter to audience, better time at work, and really it's my own personal happiness. So it works out for me.
No, I love that, because you're right. So many of us like are looking for some sort of a career ladder, or what's the next step that's natural that I should be going to, or why am I not? Maybe a lot of people are like, why am I not getting that next step? And they're really grumpy and unhappy, you know, in the company they're at. But this idea of optimizing for happiness, and then not just your own happiness, but others around you, I like that too, of like the team and everything. It's an interesting aspect to just think about it in a different way. And the result is, of course, you'll grow in your career. Of course, you'll do all the right projects and do all the things that will make, you know, an impact on your customers. But I really like that idea of optimizing for happiness.
You know, when one of your happiness things is to do things different and continuously learn, that makes it tough because some people, you know, they look at resumes and they want to hire people who are just like their resume, just like that. And I think resumes kind of stink because they're all about work experience, not the learning experience. And think of your resume. You put all these stats on there on things you accomplished, and everyone tries to make themselves look good about like ROI, but no one ever puts on the things that they learned, the failures they had. So I think if you think of, I try to, when I go through my resume and interviews, talk about what I learned and how it translates and not what I did and totally just the outcomes. I mean, that's table stakes these days, and it's totally not provable. So it's almost hard to even like hold anyone accountable to it. But what people learned, that's wisdom that's transferable. So that's kind of my approach.
You know, and when we talked before, that adds on to that idea of like, it's not so much the position on your resume that matters for the next step in growth, but you're right, like the things you've learned and the skills you've acquired. And there's this idea of like not just positioning yourself for the job that you already have, but changing and positioning yourself for the job that you really want, which may be completely different. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, in that they're like, oh, I've already gotten into this path. I got to go all the way to the end. And now if I'm like midlife, I can't just switch because I have to start from scratch, right? I have to start all the way over. So talk to us more about, how do you do that? How do you position yourself for the right fit without having to worry about starting in a new path?
One thing I do is try to make sure I spend enough time grounded to the work, because our industry, work changes so fast. If you just spend all your time managing the people, then you lose track of how work changes, your future interests, and stay relevant with your own skill set. So I always try to pick one or two projects per quarter to like go deep in and stay relevant. And that helps me have those stories too to pivot when I want to potentially change industries or careers. As you know, you've leaned in enough. The other is you have to have time to reflect. You know, mindfulness is becoming big at work now, but it's what about reflection for your health? But what about reflection just on your career experiences and then your learning? So I think that is critical. But you know what? Even if you do that, there'll be some doors that are still closed to you. So while I love the movie Rudy and believe I'm continuously trying, you can't kill yourself banging on some doors. Like some companies and industries are just really hard to get into. I applied for 10 years straight to go work at Lego, and I just could never get through a gate, even though I love
Oh, really?
that brand.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so it's like,
yeah.
Yeah, they're like they want people, I guess, who come from CPG in that industry, but there are other places. TripAdvisor is a great example of a brand that he was open to hiring someone outside their industry. You know what you want, but there has to be a fit too. Not every manager is as innovative and accepting of people's transferable skills. They want more of the transferable resume. And that is, then you need to change your resume.
And that's a good point. I mean, because I've seen that problem where people will fix up their LinkedIn telling the one story and then send it out there for all these different universal roles that are out there, and it doesn't work. And what we need to realize is, like, if there really is this Lego job that you really want, rewrite your story, rewrite your resume, rewrite your LinkedIn profile, and really update it to the skills that are transferable, the things that are relevant, and tell the right story. I think that's so critical.
There's one of the producers I hired in my last job. She applied to work on my team like 4 years in a row. And finally I was like, look, this person really wants to work here. She's going to be happy here. She, I think sometimes you just got to take risks on people too. If they don't have the perfect skill set and they don't have the perfect others, there's someone who, I'll take someone who really wants to work at my company, who's maybe a little less qualified than someone who's really qualified, but on the fence whether they prefer my company or someone else. I'd encourage people to not give up, but maybe after 10 years, you try something else.
Who knows? You just give it time, George. You may find yourself there someday. Who knows?
I don't know.
Well, let me ask this one then. When we talked before as well, there's this idea that there are leaders who kind of put people into stereotypical buckets, right? And you had made some comment about being a performance marketer versus a brand marketer. And there's just like, people just put you in one or the other. Talk about that a little bit more of like, how do we get past that stereotype and how do we, reframe ourselves to fit the right needs?
I joined TripAdvisor 4 months ago. And during the interview process with other companies, which was, I was looking for about 3 months, the top question I got as people would ask about, tell me your story, is they heard my story. And somehow after hearing that story, they came back to the question, well, are you a brand marketer or a performance marketer? and because they couldn't put me in a box, like the world is this black and white. And it realizes, I asked them, what type of person left the role? What type of person was here before? And you can always tell that they go, well, this person was a brand marketer and they didn't do well, so now we're looking for a performance marketer, or vice versa. And all it seems like that's happening, the translation from marketing requirements for leaders to recruiting seemed like it was basically becoming the inverse of the other person and a pendulum going back and forth. And in that, a company is never going to find the pursuit of what they're looking for, which is a great diverse team, someone who understands how to pull together all of marketing, and someone who can do both. And this notion that people can't do both is partly because of right now the world's so polarized with things, with labels, but it's also that we as a marketing discipline have moved towards hyper specialization. There's people who could spend their whole career doing one very marketing automation or one very specific thing. There are people who spend their whole time developing copy and they never met in person the target market, because technology allows us to be further away from the audience, but use data to try to figure out who they really are. So this notion of both technology and our discipline and then recruiting, pulling people apart, I think is detrimental to the future of our craft, where it's brands being for humans, it's creative being for good, it's people understanding people and creative problem solving. And so I always told people when they asked that question and they explained what they're looking for, that I wasn't the right person. If you want someone who can do one or the other, that's the person below this person. This is what you're looking for. And we talked about making the leap across disciplines and across careers. It's scary, but it pays off. And if you want to just focus and be like really great at one thing, there's nothing against that. But I think you'll be happier when you're really, really good at what you do, when you're closer to the top. And in order to be great at what you do, you have to understand. And that understanding needs to be broad. So for me, that was a major source of like wow, when I interview, and actually now I'm setting up my team, more rotation programs, more people hiring across backgrounds, across disciplines, and trying to create less silos and more opportunities for people to grow.
That's so interesting to hear. And certainly I can at least empathize of the feeling between, are you a brand marketer or are you a performance marketer? The world that I experience as a creative is even more stark, where it's like they will see you in a creative role up to like, executive creative director. But when it comes time for the, search for a company CMO, they're not going to be looking at a creative person at all. It's always going to be a performance marketer or a brand marketer, right? Like that's where they're going. But I like this, at least starting the conversation of, first of all, a lot of people need to step up and learn to jump side to side. Absolutely. Someone who's a creative leader who's not willing to speak marketing and understand performance marketing or do all those things isn't going to be the right fit. But I can only hope that in this world, in this era of experiences, that those who have diverse backgrounds, that there's some diversity in background, not just, all the D&I stuff that we're going through.
Right. Well, diversity of thought is huge. At IBM, I was in the leadership cabinet of marketing execs. So there were all the business unit CMOs, myself, and a few others. And of those 40 people, I think I was the only one who ever worked in a creative role. And there are others that may have done it a long time ago, but it never really came out. So, but as far as diversity of thought, it's huge, right? And more so, though, you don't have to have worked in the role to seek to understand it. And I think the best people to be able to go to the top, you need to understand business. You need to understand creative, understand marketing, understand people, understand how your brand makes an impact on the world. When I first started TripAdvisor, I spent time trying to understand how we make money. And I'll never be an expert in all these things, but if you're not at least interested, then you'll never really understand enough to have a dialogue. Everything is the people business, and people business is about relating to them, being able to talk their language, understand them. And if you don't show any interest in what the CFO does or another discipline does at the top, then it's going to be really difficult for someone who comes from a creative background to sustain in a leadership-like role.
I even heard that same advice. I know we're kind of shifting this conversation in a different way, but as far as growth and getting to the C-suite, there was another person who said that so often we go at that coming from our discipline, our field of focus, and we keep going up to these upper leadership moments and only representing that field of focus. And what they're looking for in greater leadership roles is more of someone who can see across the company, understand finance and marketing and this and that and really come at it from a kind of more of a broad perspective on everything. And I think that resonates to what you're saying here of just, it's not a matter of just when you're trying to find this path and move around, but maybe purposefully zigging and zagging your career path to learn and understand different ways that businesses works and find out how your business makes money. And then you can add in the creative ideas and flair and marketing expertise and all those things.
Yeah, agree. And the scariest conversation for a creative would probably be to go befriend the CFO and try to learn the business. But when you do that, everything else will seem easy, and you'll be able to, I think, be more effective, because then you'll be able to creative problem solve on things that move the needle, and you'll be able to have a perspective that maybe not many other people in the company do. It's uncomfortable sometimes on learning someone else's discipline, but look, everyone has an opinion on someone's creative, right?
Oh yeah.
Every other discipline thinks they know marketing. Why don't we go out and learn everyone else's discipline?
Let me tell you about that spreadsheet there, and we're talking numbers. I'm going to tell you exactly which one's up.
There's no reason why a creative can't have a great idea on how to make more money. So I think it's really the opportunity. I mean, that's what happens in a 5-person startup anyways, right? They're all sitting around the table sharing the conversations, and that's why they come up with really cool stuff that rapidly grows the company. And then as we grow, we get into our silos, and then people get stuck, and next thing you know, 40 years later, they're doing the same thing. And so, and then now we're back to taking leaps back and forth and trying to advance your career without taking a step backward.
Yeah, maybe that's just a good idea, because I've seen a lot of people who feel like they hit a wall, and so they've jumped off and done the startup and been like a creative, founder or whatever it may be. But I really think there is an opportunity that's not the only path forward as a marketer or creative to get to the C-suite. There certainly are other paths, and this is the starting of it, learning those disciplines, understanding it, and then crafting your career to map to some of those moments on purpose.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a great creative, you're really good at understanding the essence of a brand, figuring out a challenge, and then figuring out how to attack the brief to get from here to there. That's what taking a leap in your career is, right? You're the brand. You have a challenge where there's people out there that don't believe you're relevant for the role. So how are you going to take the brand, the brief, which is your resume, which most all of us get these briefs of a bunch of stats and data and facts that don't really tell the story that we need, that we know will break through, and figure out how to make it work. Simplicity is key. I think within every great career, if you can't tell your own story, then who can? So
well, it's the cobbler's children, right? That's the biggest reason we don't do it. But that's a good advice. Go back, treat your resume or your LinkedIn profile as a brief. How are you going to creatively tell that story in a way that breaks through? I love it. That's great. Well, we're getting near the end here. Maybe a couple quick last questions. First, what about if you join a new team? How have you helped convince? Let's say you spun a great story, you got a new role. Maybe everyone on the team is like, "Who is this character?" How do you work with teams, and what is your strategy to build those relationships and try something new and reframe the story so that the team comes along with you?
Yeah, I'll say the last 2 ways I did, and the pluses and minuses of both. One time I set up a list of 100 people I'm going to interview and meet. I'm going to fly to every office. I'm just going to build relationships. I'm going to develop hypotheses, talk to the CMO and the other execs, and then formalize a POV that can sustain. And that POV at IBM is called Make Less Matter More. It's make half as much stuff twice as good, focusing on mattering, make every impression count. And that was kind of like the DNA of what originally started out as content and spread to all disciplines to the point where our whole marketing strategy for the next couple of years was about cutting the number of campaigns in half, figuring out how to really focus on the essence and the message and honing it down. And we went from 300 campaigns down to 6 by the time we were done.
Wow, that's something we need to do. We're still at the 300.
It was a journey. I'm not saying, I didn't do that journey alone. It was a movement. Everyone was on board. But when I handed over the keys to that mantra and try to make it more about we and us versus my own mantra for a discipline, it became more ownable for everyone. So best advice is when you start a company, spend time on thinking about your position that you're not going to change for years, because great leaders come in and if you flip-flop too often, you're done. The other approach I took was I was handed this 90-day book, which is like your first 90 days, things you should do. And I read it and I thought, I don't know, I had a couple of weeks in between jobs. I was like, I'm going to write down this and develop a 90-day plan and come up with my strategy. And there's a couple of challenges with that approach. One is not every organization is ready in 90 days for your point of view. Another is not every organization can be fully understood in 90 days. Very few relationships can be built to the point where trust is there for you to actually be broadly accepted in 90 days. So overall, that may work at some companies and some cultures, but I'm real hesitant to apply, going back to my learnings from consulting, the same structured deck applied to the same problem, get you the same solutions. And I don't know if that leads to the best outcomes. So my own personal advice to myself is to not do that again and try to figure out, don't time box it.
Right. Well, this has been awesome. Maybe last question, any just last advice for marketers or creatives who are hoping to make a change and how they can do it without starting over? Like, what are the big broad strokes that you'd let them know of what to do moving forward?
Well, figure out your money situation, and you might not have to start over from a title wise, but you might take less money to go take the job you want, and you have to figure out on how much you're willing to sacrifice in that scenario. So A is figure out where you're willing to bend versus not. The second is to treat yourself like the brief, have a story. But I wouldn't waste any time applying on websites. If you're making a leap, don't go through the black hole, right? Go to people. And so if you're going to go to people and do a one-on-one approach to telling your story to people, then it has to be tailored to the person and the company every time. So it's going to take a lot of energy. The key here is just not giving up and getting discouraged then, because the energy it takes to do change management, which is changing your career, requires changing someone's perception on what they need in that job. It's going to take energy. It's going to take storytelling. It's going to take persistence. But it's possible. In the end, if you know there's a change that you need in order to follow your happiness, that it will be possible and will happen. You just have to keep figuring out where the open doors are and how your story resonates with that person.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much, George. All right, as we close here, where can people follow you? How do they know what's going on in your world? LinkedIn, social, somewhere? Let us know where they can find you.
Yeah, just go to LinkedIn and search for George Hammer. I post there regularly, and DM me, and I'm happy to have a conversation and continue with anyone about, and if I can help you in any way possible, let me know.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it. As always, you can find us at realcreativeleadership.com or on YouTube or at your favorite podcast. Again, our ask to all of you, if you like this content, please share with your friends, your colleagues, whatever. Add some comments, whatever it is, just to engage. We appreciate any form of engagement on the show. Again, you can find me at adamwmorgan.com or on LinkedIn. And this show is produced by The Stoke Group. You can always find them at thestokegroup.com if you need a media, marketing, creative partner to get through whatever you need for your business. They can help out with that as well. So thank you for listening to Real Creative Leadership, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks for listening to Real Creative Leadership. I'm your host, Adam Morgan. This series is produced by The Stoke Group, a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in content marketing, video, and interactive experiences. If you're looking for a partner to build a strategy and content that delivers, visit thestokegroup.com and connect today.